Look, there's a lot of games out there where the comparison to Dark Souls and Bloodborne are stretched a little bit, mostly referring to their difficulty. Really, the term is more for SEO and search optimization more than anything else in that case, even when it's not fully accurate. Today's game is not one of those games. It's definitely a Souls-like. Hunt the Night is an action-adventure game with deliberate combat that releases today, April 13th, 2023, for the price of $19.99. It's available on PC, specifically Steam, GOG, and the Epic Games Store. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from PRHound for review purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? You play as Vesper, a member of the Stalkers, who are fighting Lovecraftian evils. The night. The humans run the day, and the horrid creatures run the night, and they don't get along very much. The basic backstory revolves around the group of Stalkers, this group of humans who have figured out how to fight the darkness with the darkness itself. Their goal seems to be simple: to activate the Seal of Night, an artifact that will basically be the opposite of the 30 Days of Night movie, aka Everlasting Day, and a horrible problem to vampires everywhere, except good old Vlad, of course. Problem is that, well, the night is getting a bit more powerful, and is ripping the world and Stalkers apart left and right. Vesper is in a unique position, as not only is she the daughter of a perceived traitor that means that people aren't going to trust her in the first place, she also has a unique darkness inside her in Umbra, a darkness that seems to try to be taking control of her like the others, but also wanting to keep her alive as much as she can, sort of not like the others. She seems skilled, but doesn't seem to be that different from any other Stalker at the start, but you'll learn that maybe that's not the case. In fact, she may be the one that can actually save the world. With the basis of the story established, let's dive into the thing that you're probably here for the most: the gameplay. Combat is methodical back and forth combat, with distinct enemy attack patterns with a reasonable early game variety of enemy types, but that does start to lessen over the length of the game. These horrors will hit hard, usually taking a good 1/4 of health in the early game if you're not careful, so you'll need to be smart with your attacks. There are 5 primary weapons of different skill sets, and to be honest, you'll want to try them all out. You got your basic sword with a medium distance to hit, medium swing speed, and is the jack of all trades. You got the spear, which has more range vertically, but not horizontally. You've also got the lacerators, which do quick damage and are paired well with status damage. Each playstyle is a little bit different, but still viable, and certain weapons do well against some enemies and bosses a lot more than others, but you can't change the weapon during combat. Don't worry about that though, you'll die enough that you'll change weapons at the start of the next run just as quickly. Now you do have a ranged combat option with guns, and they are tied to the melee combat in several ways. You have 6 bullets, with each gun using a specific number at once, and they're regenerated, the bullets I mean, with 3 melee hits. Now, unlike some games, these shots can be good ending shots to take out an enemy, especially when using them with crowd control and not just using to pick off enemies that you can't reach. I found the differences between the guns significant as I was switching back and forth depending on the situation. The key element of this combat, however, over everything else, is the dodge, which has invincibility frames and can be spammed for a reasonable period of time. Like, I'm not kidding, you can spam it for a good 4 to 5 seconds, and the refresh rate of that actual stamina isn't exactly slow either. At first, this feels like it's something that is truly overpowered. You can dodge a lot of damage even if you aren't doing damage during that time to enemies. But I will admit, that fear is something that never really came to fruition when it came to the difficulty. Due to constrained fighting spaces and the mixture of ranged and enemy attack types, I still died even when spamming it, and probably more so because of the types of attack animations you'd run into. I just run into the next attack that somebody was going off on. That's because this combat is slow, deliberate, yet has the ability to be fast-paced if necessary. See, when I compare this to Dark Souls and Bloodborne, I'm specifically talking about the getting in and getting out of combat. Like, the biggest advantage for regular fights in this game is knowing how many hits that an enemy can take before they die, or before you have to dodge out of the way. Granted, the fact that it's in 2D means that there's less room to move and less complexity in several ways over 3D spaces, but that doesn't mean it's easy. A lot of these ranges, when it came to battle, seemed to be on the edge of certain weapon types or dodge distances, and feels like it's gone through its paces when it came to the normal balancing of the game. I was getting frustrated, but more so at myself than the game, because I would make another stupid mistake, or just wasn't getting exactly where the specific distance I wanted to hit was. But once I got that, everything started to click. Granted, part of why it works is that healing items follow the Souls formula, only regenerating at save points, and you really feel the scarcity with some of the sections of the game. Like to the point where I'm barely holding on to that last segment, and hoping like hell the next room has the save room that I can make progress to, because I'm not going back through that. Now, I will say that those who are newer to the genre may really struggle in this area, even with the ability to get more healing items and upgrades via grinding, with permanent upgrades being purchasable. When it comes to accessibility in games like this, it's not an easy task to adjust things, and to be quite honest, Hunt the Night isn't changing that. So if you don't like Souls games in general, you're not gonna like this one, even if it's a little different. So the combat's great, right? Like, boss fights are a great example of the fights being ramped up to 11 and challenging you, right? Well, yeah, even though it can get really frustrating, especially when you die against one boss 57 times. Yes, 57. Like, I might have done a boss out of order, I think, and well, let's just say things weren't going well. But overall, the boss patterns are distinguishable, dodgeable, but challenging in a great way, pushing your limits. So everything's great, right? Well, it is and isn't. See, as much as the game gets right mechanically, with the feel of the movement and the controls, it's the little things that start to add up that really start to wear at me when it comes to the experience. Things like no invincibility frames upon entering or respawning in an area, including during boss fights. There were plenty of times where I would accidentally dash off an edge to avoid damage, respawn, and immediately take damage when respawning. I mean, that's my fault, I suppose, but this also applied to entering rooms again, including taking damage on enemy patterns when walking into a room within a millisecond. Yeah, I could have killed him the first time around, but that's sort of the thing. Like, okay, I avoided him by walking away, and I'm immediately taking damage by walking back in? That just doesn't seem right. The game sometimes gets cute with certain sections, with sections being extra long or having an extra gimmick, and sometimes it really wears on you, especially with no save points, and going through it the first time, you're probably going to fail because you don't know some gimmick or element that you need to know. Take the sequence of rooms that you have to do 3 times in a row, where you lose abilities on each go. One bad mistake leads to health being lost, and then possibly failing, and you lose so much motivation to go on when you fail on that 3rd try, because you don't even get the possibility of saving to make things easier, but more so, you're just sort of done and over with it because you're going through the same thing the 4th, 5th, 6th time, the 7th, 8th, 9th time, and all that repetition ends up really causing problems because you just lose every motivation to go on. Speaking of repetition and sort of backtracking, let's talk about the exploration and the quests, because this game really highlights its comparison to Dark Souls with how you go about quests, aka, you don't track them. Hell, there's no map in the game. That's right, no reference point to look at. You have to figure it out based on in-game clues, signs, and remember name locations. Now, that's going to be a problem for some, but if you stay on the main paths, you'll be fine. But here's a hint to people. Write shit down. No, seriously, write shit down, because guess what? That reference to where that health may be that you have to unlock, well, it's a very specific name that you're not going to remember off the top of your head, and well, knowing what it is when you wrote it down, okay, yeah, maybe that's it. There's a mixture of the main content, which is quests to find parts of the seals, along with a mixture of tasks that you can do, like find information in labs, or things that you can come across that have little stories in the world. Usually these quests do give you new weapons, equipment, or secondary skills and trinkets, and give you more options in constructing your character. And to be frank, was some of the best parts of the game when it came to secondary storytelling. But more on that in a minute. There was some good side content overall here, but I will admit, even 17 hours into the game, I wanted a little more, but that's also because I really liked the content I came across. It's also because the atmosphere of the game is consistent in its presentation and vibe, which, considering that this feels Dark Souls and Bloodborne inspired, let's just say that happy endings wasn't exactly what the game is going for. But I will say that more than other games in the genre, this game does play to its horror roots a little more than others, and in more ways than just, well, depression. Sure, the game has some horrifying creatures and some fun designs when it comes to dark type bosses, but the game's focus on the effects on the human side of things, and really the overly brutal and deadly consequences of this world, made it really sell the story overall. And when I mean atmosphere, I mean things get uneasy and creepy, and the game will shock you at a couple of points with jump scares. Not many, but they will get you, because you usually don't see it coming. Now, for the purposes of showing you one, I'll spoil one, but I really appreciated the scare that seemed to be a homage to the original Resident Evil, as dogs jumping through windows to scare a female heroine. Yep, that's one of the bombshell moments of RE1. But atmosphere also means that it can't just be jump scares and big moments. It's those little moments that Hunt the Night does very well in setting the mood. It doesn't have what I call a traditional soundtrack. Many of the accompanying music in the world is there to set a tone of mystery and darkness, and does well for the most part. Sure, there are some more action sequences that get a little bit more energy, but it's good that the music direction really focused on setting the mood rather than getting overly complicated with the beats and the noise. Sometimes less is more. And well, listen here and see what I'm talking about. Now, I will say on the visual side of things, there's some good elements on the visuals, like the design of the creatures as I mentioned before, and a lot of the animation, Like the ooze and tentacles in this castle here, and how they move and how they feel just like they're getting under your skin. Animation is simple but effective in a lot of cases, and that goes with Vesper as well. The world does have a good variety to it when it comes to the visuals, and there's different biomes and areas to explore. But I will admit that sections really started to feel samey over time, and even with different room configurations, I was expecting more uniqueness in the level design when it came to unique assets in a room and landmarks. It's not bad by any means, but I also wasn't exactly blown away at any point. But I think that's my cue to transition to the part that I'm still struggling with when it comes to really giving my opinion on this game, and that's the story. See, the basis of the story is simple, but it's a tale as old as time. There's a big evil taking over the world, there's a lot of misery and chaos around it, sacrifices to be made. You've seen a lot of these before, especially in Lovecraftian and Souls-type stories. Hell, it's a good basis to make a game around, and it's all about the connecting stories and the overall plot that sells it. And in Hunt the Night, I find it to be really hit and miss when it comes to that. Like, the overall main plot about the seals. Yeah, it's there, but I feel like the game sort of forgets about it at times. Like, sure, you get set pieces in the game about Vesper and her Umbra side, and her family, and her father who was a traitor. You get information about that. But it usually feels so disconnected from every other story in the world, which doesn't seem right when it comes to this type of plot, and what it says is happening and what's really happening. Like, there's points in the story that it's mentioned that Vesper is basically fighting off Umbra from taking control, and yet sometimes it really feels like that's not the case. Like, I would expect a scene of Vesper struggling with her arm, or her eyes glowing at a certain point to indicate that she's fighting and having trouble. But besides a scene or two where she's about to die, very early in the game and in the mid-game, and Umbra then takes over at that point, because, well, she'll die too, that really doesn't happen in the first significant chunk of the game. What makes this odd to me is that other parts of the story, especially following certain sub-stories, really do reward people who pay attention to even the smallest details in NPCs. Granted, the example that I was going to use ended up being two different people, similar names and hair color unfortunately, but it doesn't change the fact that there are good stories here in terms of those sub-stories. I would take a look at everything around in terms of exploring everything in the environment, even if you get turned around a little bit. So why did the main plot feel so weird and disconnected when it got these kinds of elements right? I will admit, this storytelling isn't exactly all my cup of tea. Like, I like environmental storytelling, or stories that start from things like finding a note on the ground about a family who's trying to hold out for supplies, and they decide to do it in a basement. Then I'm like, oh cool, I want to see what happened. Did they survive? Did they die? Did the monsters get in? What happened to them? And then I can't find a basement, or any evidence that suggests of the fate of the family. Hell, I can't find the basement or if the basement existed. Which, in a genre like this, not knowing what happened is a part of the horror. I get it. Not knowing is a little bit more scary because it's the unknown. But I also feel like the game relied a lot on this and exposition and note dumps that sometimes could have really been story sequences that would have really sold the overall plot with just having it happen in a cutscene in front of you. Because when it does happen, when you find the person or do something like that, it's really effective in this game. Like, extremely effective. Emotional. So, why not do that for a lot more than just a couple of side stories? See, I went back and forth a lot on this game when it came to my overall thoughts on the game and the final review score. At times, I would really get into the game, really enjoying the combat and really enjoying the world and its storytelling. But then I'd stumble because of running into a specific sequence or story, and then would start to question the game a lot more, and almost started to really hyper-focus on some of its faults. But then a cool boss fight would happen, and I'd be great again. The game oscillated between these states a lot for me, and I do admit something here. I'd rather have a game like this than one that doesn't really reach for the stars or doesn't go for bigger heights when it comes to those bigger strengths. Sure, there are more games that are more stable when it comes to the overall feel of the game, but they also are a little bit more boring than what Hut the Knight is. I feel like I'll remember the moments in this game a lot more than some others than I've played in a similar quality. And that does mean something when it comes to buyability, because in the end, you want those moments to remember, because those are the ones you'll hold on to. Are there better games in the genre? I would say yes, despite the game being competent in several areas and being fun to play and enjoy. Does it have elements that I wish were a little bit more refined, especially some of those smaller gameplay details? Yes, it could have used a coat of polish on some of those extra elements, despite the game being technically sound. Is it a game worth buying? Yes, because of the quality of the combat, but the particular highs in certain elements of boss fights and secondary storytelling. That's the reason to play it over some of the others in the genre. Is it a world beater? No, but it's solid enough to score an 84 out of 100, making it a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. As you can see, there are several enhancers and dehancers for this game, because there are certain types of players that will hate this game, like will absolutely hate it, but some players will absolutely love it, and some will be a combination of all these enhancers on screen and will be back to the main score, so it'll still be a solid buy. That's it for this review. Coming up next on the channel, well, I want to actually take a moment to discuss that. There have been some comments in the YouTube reviews that I've done lately that have made me reflect on some things regarding the reviews on this channel. Now, am I overly talkative and do I describe things a little bit too much at times? I admit I do. Some of it is for the devs, some of it is the fact that I can't keep a point to a small point at all at times, but I do like some of the feedback that I've gotten lately and want to sort of look at how I do reviews, and in particular how I do scoring systems, not necessarily changing my scoring system, but how I present it in a review. You know, maybe give a summary at the start, give the score, and then go into more detail for people who may want to hear the score, but once they hear the score, maybe they want to see a little bit more, as opposed to having to get through the entire review. So I may play with that, but I would love to hear your feedback on this review in the comments section below. And if you like content like this, well, hit that subscribe button to see more reviews like this, or go watch a review that you haven't seen on this channel before. Coming up next on the channel, I have no idea, but that's what the Discord is for, and that's what the Google Calendar is for in the description below. That gives an idea of what I'll be targeting in terms of games to stream over on Twitch, or games that I will review. Anyway, that's it for now, and as always, keep on gaming.